Today, as we continue talking about suicide, we're looking at what happens to those left behind after a loved one chooses to die by suicide. I'm Dr. B, and I want you to fully enjoy life and experience the freedom that God desires for you and also for those around you. You know, as I've shared, as a counselor, pastor, police chaplain, I've dealt with suicide and helped suicide survivors most of my adult life. And what I've learned is that mental health issues and those that especially end with suicide kind of carry a stigma that the family and friends have to endure. And today I've asked Jess Street, who is a current client of mine and has experienced this terrible tragedy, to share her story. She recently lost a loved one to suicide and is now willing to break out of the stigma of being a suicide survivor. So, hi, Jess. I want to just welcome you to Finding Freedom. First of all, just tell us a little bit about your relationship with Carl. What type of person was he?
I met Carl about 4.5 years ago, and just from day one when we met, we hit it off like we were best friends. The first day that we ever met, we talked for 7 hours straight before, going our separate ways, and we're pretty much inseparable since then. Mm-hmm. So our relationship, like with any kind of, had its small issues here and there, right. But for the most part, people called us a power couple. Okay. They saw us, they're like, you guys are gorgeous. Right. you guys are accomplishing so much. Everything that you put your mind to, you make it happen. And okay. He was my favorite person. And I love spending time with him every single day. Even after 4 years, I still was excited to see him after I hadn't seen him for a while. And, right. And he felt the same way about me.
That's true. Well, this makes it tough, but if you don't mind, share in your own words what happened and whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Okay. So the day that I met Carl, actually, he had mentioned that he had a previous suicide attempt within a couple of months before I met him because of some things that were going on in his personal life. So I knew that there was some issues there with maybe depression or suicidal thoughts, but I just put it to the back of my mind because, everybody has bad days, bad moments. So throughout the next 4 years, it would come up somewhat regularly. And then he went through major traumatic loss. He lost his mom to cancer, and she died on hospice at home. And he had to sign her DNR. He also lost his dad to COVID, and Carl had to make the choice to take him off of life support in the ICU. And so him and I both kind of sat there and watched his dad struggle at the end. And he also lost his best friend to suicide in the time that we were together. So it was something that just kept coming up. And so the day that he died was October 30th, this past October. And we had a great day on Friday. We went out shopping. We were getting things done around our farm. We have a 5-acre farm. And we were talking about future plans. He had a TV gig coming up. He was going to be interviewed and doing some magic on TV. He was a sideshow performer and a magician. And he just kind of got into this spiral of just having a really bad night that night. And I couldn't get a hold of him. I finished work at midnight, couldn't get a hold of him. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to call him one more time. He weren't staying together that night. So I called him the last time, and he actually picked up the phone, and he sounded distraught. Right. And so I told him that I loved him. I told him, that I would always love him. And then he said, I tried to hang myself. So in my mind, I was like, what does that mean? How do you try to hang yourself? So I said, hold on, I'll be right there. And I hung up, and I immediately got in my car and drove to where he was. I thought he had maybe gone to walk around the neighborhood he was staying in because, the door was locked, but all the lights were on, and it was 2:00 in the morning. Eventually I climbed up on a chair and I looked in the window where I could see, where he was, and I saw him just in a position that he shouldn't be in, and he had hung himself. So I broke into the house, and I had to cut him down.
Wow. That is so tough. Thanks for your honesty and sharing that with us. But what type of feelings have you been dealing with since then?
It's funny. They talk about like the stages of grief, and I haven't felt anger at him. I loved him so much. I just feel compassion for the pain that he was going through. And I know that he would have felt relief for finally not having pain after all the things that he had been through. But the biggest thing that I've been struggling with for the last 3 months is just feeling like I want to join him.
Yeah.
And so for the first 2 months, it was awful. And I hate to admit it, but I spent, every single day trying to convince myself that my 12-year-old daughter would be okay without me.
Right.
And that, I wasn't a suitable parent, and that she would just be better off if I wasn't there so that I could follow Carl. And, it was awful. And then I felt guilty for having those thoughts,
Right.
Guilty at myself, but also guilty for what happened, because when you lose somebody to suicide, when you lose somebody at all
Right.
in any way, there's always guilt, no matter
Right.
what. And that's just, it's overwhelming. It's
Right.
overwhelming on a daily basis, even moment to moment.
Right. I know you and I have had several talks since we've been meeting, and you've worked through a lot so far. But what do you do right now to cope? I mean, to make it day by day. What do you do?
Well, one of the things that somebody told me early on, and it's just really stuck in my head as a really good analogy, is that dealing with grief, especially grief of losing somebody to suicide, is like a rip current. And the grief will pull you out. And if you try to fight against it, it'll drag you under, and it'll take you. So you really have to just kind of sit in it and feel the pain and
Right.
understand that the deep, dark, depressing feelings are temporary. And eventually that riptide is going to pull you out, push you back to shore.
Right.
So it's hard in the moment to remember that, it is going to end, or at
Right.
least the pain is going to dull a little bit to the point where you can function again.
Sure.
But I think having that analogy to think about when I'm, deep in that rip current is trying to pull me down has been really helpful.
Do you feel like your relationship with God has helped also to get you through this?
I don't know what things would be like if I wasn't a Christian.
Okay.
However, there was moments when absolutely my faith and my Christianity was the only thing
Right.
that kept me
Okay.
here. The only thing,
Right.
Day one, right away, faith was a big part of our relationship too. And Carl
Sure.
had recently become a Christian
That's
within the
right.
last couple of years. So I knew without a doubt that he was in heaven. And so I
Okay.
know that I'll see him again.
Okay.
So digging into the word and everything I could find about heaven and the afterlife and all of that has been just a saving grace, because
Right.
without, if I didn't know if I would ever see him again, I don't know how I would do it.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I really do. Also, I know you and I have talked about how your life has changed. This has changed your life, and it will forever. But how have your priorities and perspectives changed since this happened?
For the last 4 years that him and I were together, or for the 4 years that him and I were together, he was my priority because there was so much that he was dealing with. So everything else, my career, my daughter, just my life in general, my goals, I put them all to the side so that I could
Right.
help him, just because he was struggling so much and in so much pain. And I didn't necessarily realize it until I kind of got out of that situation and looked back and realized, oh my
Right.
gosh, all these things that I've wanted to do for the last 4 years,
Right.
I haven't been doing. So as far as my priorities changing, I've realized that my life inevitably always goes better when I put God first.
Amen.
So, Carl and I tried to put God first, but since he was a baby new Christian, sometimes that was hard to just keep in
Right.
perspective.
Okay.
But I quit my nurse practitioner college program, and I actually started a seminary program to get my bachelor's in
Right.
divinity. So that was a future plan
Okay.
that ended up getting bumped way up.
Right.
And that's been something that has been a daily help to me too, just to be
Good.
more intentional about reading and studying the Bible and
Good for
learning
you.
what it's like to have a better relationship with Christ.
And I know my time with you, what I've learned about you, Jess, is that you've made the choice to follow the path to be better and not bitter. What are you doing to help others who may be suicide survivors now?
One of the things that I'm doing is, in the beginning, there's a lot of support groups out there online, specifically on social media and Facebook. And one of the things I noticed was that in those groups, people tend to just talk about their pain but they
Right.
don't talk about moving forward. So somebody
Okay.
will say, it's been 6 years for me and nothing ever gets better.
Mm.
And for me, at the very beginning, that was the worst possible thing to hear because you have no hope. And with
Right.
no hope, life is pointless.
Right.
And so one of the things I've been doing is like having conversations with people that are dealing with similar things and explaining to them that there is hope, but it's a choice. You have to make a choice to get better. You can't just sit and wallow in your
Right.
pain, or your pain is just going to stay there. So there's people in my life that I haven't been speaking to anymore because they're the ones that years and years in, they choose to just sit and wallow in that pain.
Right.
So, I'm not a stranger to grief. My best friend took her own life when I was 21, and that was 16 and a half years ago.
Wow.
So, suicide is something that's always been important to me as far as decreasing the stigma.
Right.
And so I've just been open with it. And so many people have contacted me and said, "You're so strong. What you're doing is amazing." And I'm like, this is not me being strong. It's me surviving, doing what I have to do,
Exactly.
but also trying to do my best to let people know that even people that seem like everything in their life is going great, that might not be the picture. That might not be what's real, what's inside. It might just be the person they're portraying to the public.
And thank you for that too, Jess. The last thing I'm going to ask you to do is, if you would just look into the camera, and there may be somebody watching that is a suicide survivor that's lost a loved one to suicide. What would you say to them right now?
I would say that to take what everybody says with a grain of salt, because everybody has a different journey. It's not going to be the same for every single person. There was many, many people that told me things never get better. Your pain is never going to go away. And while that is true, that your pain will never go away, it's possible to grow so that that pain inside you isn't as huge as it used to be. So what I would say to anybody that's lost somebody to suicide is that just, do what you have to do. Take everything a minute at a time, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. Just do whatever it takes and focus on making things happen. Focus on, getting out of bed and washing your hair or taking care of your pets. Focus on the tasks that you need to do every single day rather than focusing on the grief, because the more you focus on, the bigger it's going to be.
Thank you, Jess. You've been so helpful, and I know you're going to help a lot of people. Now, if you're contemplating suicide or know someone who is and would like to connect with Jess, or if you're a suicide survivor, her contact information is in the description below. My next video will be how to help family members and friends after suicide. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If it was helpful to you, be sure to hit the thumbs up button. Also, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you can always know when we post new content. Have a wonderful day as you continue finding freedom in your life.